The Half-Life and Portal franchises are two of the most well-known and influential game series in the world. Both produced by Valve Software, they set incredible new standards in linear game design, narrative and first-person games, the use of physics in games as well as in puzzle design, and even writing humor in games. These two franchises have both done so much despite being so different, and I want to rank their games together since they take place in the same universe and share a lot of the same DNA, not to mention sharing the same game engines. I've been a huge fan of this universe and these games for over a decade now, and they're among the games that I love to replay at least once a year just to experience them all over again. Aside from Half-Life Decay, Portal 2 Co-op, and Half-Life Alyx, all of which I've only experienced for the first time recently, I'm deeply familiar with all of them, and they've shaped my understanding of what video games can do to immerse and engage the player in extremely creative worlds. I owe a lot to them, and I'm sure many others feel similarly or the same, so this is my excuse to talk about them. A few disclaimers before I start. For the purposes of this ranking, I'm only including mainline games in the Half-Life and Portal franchises, by which I mean the 5 Half-Life games produced by Valve, the 3 expansions made for the original Half-Life by Gearbox Software, and the 2 Portal games. I will not be including any of the Aperture Science spin-offs, the multiplayer deathmatch titles, or any other extra content made for Half-Life. And it goes without saying that I won't be including any mods for these games, though there are of course plenty that are a lot of fun and very impressive, and I'll mention a few where they're relevant. I'll also be treading lightly on story spoilers. For most of these games, I'll be going into detail about certain events that happen across them, since most of them are years old by now, but won't talk too much about the actual plot details where I can avoid it. So if you haven't played these games before and want an entirely vanilla experience, I recommend coming back to this video after giving them a go. The only exception will be Half-Life Alyx, which I know a lot of people haven't gotten to play yet, so I'll be avoiding spoilers for the story and gameplay for that one. Alright, let's get started. Number 10. Half-Life Decay. Out of all of the titles in this series, Decay is the one most often forgotten. It was the third and final expansion to the original Half-Life by Gearbox Software, and is notable for being the only co-op multiplayer campaign in the canonical franchise. It's also the only title that's not officially supported by Valve anymore, having only been released for the PS2 and never ported onto PC or Steam. Why this is the case has never been made explicitly clear. A developer who worked for Gearbox stated that they had been working to port Decay onto PC, but it was never released due to powers beyond their control, whatever that may imply. Because of the robust modding community around Valve's games, we are fortunate enough to have an unofficial PC port of Decay, freely available to download and play, so long as you own the original Half-Life. Aside from being able to work on modern computers, the port manages to create a single-player workaround to this game by allowing you to switch between the 2 protagonists at the touch of a button. If you have a friend to play with, the multiplayer is still accessible through LAN, though that requires more setup. I personally played through Decay in single-player. And I've got to say, after experiencing this expansion for the first time, I might see why Valve didn't want to bother with it. It's not bad, but it's also got a very different feel from the rest of the franchise. Instead of being one continuous and unbroken narrative from beginning to end, Decay is split into several small levels that require you to fulfill different objectives. At the end of the level, each player is given a rank based on how many enemies they killed, how much damage they took, and how accurate they were. I really didn't expect to see a score system like this in a Half-Life game. This means that most of the narrative on display amounts to these little vignettes, where you have to help out some scientists with whatever task they require at the moment in order to stabilize things after the resonance cascade. The player characters are a couple of female HEV scientists named Colette Green and Gina Cross, the latter of whom was the hologram lady in the Hazard course. They play more or less the same as Gordon, even having the same arm textures, but unlock weapons at a fairly slow rate, depending on what level you're on. My experience wasn't that of someone who played this game in its original form, but I imagine most people playing this today would do so in single player. That said, playing in single player can be such a drag on the experience because you have to constantly switch back and forth between the 2 characters and get both of them to important choke points, especially if there's a moment where cooperation is necessary, which is frequent. Even when there's no cooperation required, you might still feel compelled to switch between them often, so they both have a chance at getting an A rank. You might be saying, it's just a meaningless ranking, why does it matter? Well, the developers actually locked a hidden level behind getting an A rank for both characters on every regular level, meaning your performance has to be top-notch if you want to play it. That might be fun for 2 players, but for one, I think it's really tedious. Thankfully, the people who ported this game to PC added in an Easter egg challenge that allows you to unlock it without the rankings if you prefer, which I definitely recommend. Though it didn't work for me, and I wound up having to use a console command to unlock the level anyway. Aside from that, the actual gameplay experience of Decay was remarkably easy. There are no difficulty options at the start, you just select a level and jump in. Everything feels like it goes down way too easily, and the enemies don't do nearly enough damage to sufficiently harm you. The AI is also somehow worse than in Half-Life 1, especially with the military, who feel much less aware and a lot less accurate when trying to shoot you. Despite having a variety of different HD models compared to what's seen in Half-Life and the other Gearbox expansions, there are no new enemies in Decay, aside from this flying manta ray thing at the end, which is mostly just there to spawn in enemies. Since Valve likes to keep updating even their oldest games, it's possible that Half-Life and the other expansions had similar issues, but years of developer support ironed some of them out, a luxury which wasn't afforded to Decay. The most challenging parts of the game for me were ones where simultaneous cooperation was the intent, but obviously couldn't be accomplished, like sections where one player had to be doing something while the other defended them. The character you're not playing as has rudimentary AI that allows them to attack nearby enemies, but they have about the same level of accuracy as the Black Mesa guards, and they tend to randomly cycle through your weapons and eat up your ammo if you're in an encounter. There were also several sections where you encounter waves of enemies constantly spawning, and juggling green and cross was sometimes an issue. In those cases, I was grateful for the enemy's relatively low damage output, but only because I was already handicapped myself. The worst parts of the game, without question, were the ones where glitches prevented you from completing your objective. Like I said, levels in Decay are objective-based, so the goal is often get this NPC from one place to another. It's never quite on the level of an escort quest, so that part isn't bad. It gets bad when the NPC gets to where they need to go and then doesn't do what they're supposed to. In the dormitories level, you're supposed to find a security guard and bring him to Dr. Keller, who gives you your objectives throughout most of the game. You go through the level, watching several guards die in brutal ways and encountering aliens in the military, only to find one at the very end. You can ask him to follow you, but once he reaches Dr. Keller, they act like the other doesn't exist. Turns out you have to not interact with the guard, or else it breaks his scripted path of walking to Keller himself. I had to redo this level 4 times, failing twice because of this issue, and once because one of the characters I kept switching back to decided to fire a weapon with splash damage whenever I switched back to her, and the weapon wasn't even equipped. The worst part about all of this is that there is no other point in the game where you need or even are able to get a guard to follow you, so why was this interaction kept in at all? If you know where these glitches are and you're able to anticipate them, then you might be able to quick save beforehand to ensure that you can come back to that spot if something goes wrong. At least, you would in any other Half-Life game. Decay's level-based structure means that there's no saving allowed, so if you get screwed over by wonky AI or the game crashes, then too bad, you've got to restart the level. As you might imagine, this can make for a particularly hellish gameplay experience. There are also several sections where the objective, or whether your progression is being halted due to something you haven't done yet, isn't made very clear. There's a level where you have to press a button to complete an objective, but it's implied that you need to destroy a circling military helicopter before it will let you. Unlike basically every other Half-Life game, at this point you have no rockets. I spent something like 10 minutes dumping bullets into the chopper and fighting off the infinite number of soldiers it spawned before I gave up and looked up a guide, and it turns out you have to shoot the rotors in order to down it, something which you're never told nor have been required to do in Half-Life or the other expansions. I generally try to avoid using guides on first playthroughs, but considering Decay's lack of saving and gameplay that's not incredibly inspired, I felt like it was justified here. If I wasted all of my resources trying something that wasn't guaranteed to work, I'd have to restart the whole level. Being able to experiment and try different methods for ideal outcomes is one of the things I value most in a game, and the lack of saving really takes that away. The delivery of its narrative is also something unique to Decay. As I mentioned, you no longer have an unbroken first-person perspective with the level switching, so it feels like you're jumping around to different notable parts of Green and Cross's story. You're given a new objective from Rosenberg or Keller at the beginning of each level, building up to the ultimate goal of getting the rocket scene in Half-Life ready to launch, and suppressing the effects of the resonance cascade. The game's final level is strangely underwhelming, with your task just being defend the machine from spawning enemies in a small arena. Even weirder is the inconclusive nature of this game's ending, where you're basically just told, "We did it!" And there's no resolution to the fates of Green, Cross, or Keller. Did they survive the Black Mesa incident? Escape? Who knows? The game isn't concerned with those answers, and since Valve likes to pretend the Gearbox expansions don't exist as far as the main Half-Life timeline is concerned, neither should you be. Man, good thing that the Half-Life series never left the fates of its characters unresolved again, huh? Anyway, if you've gotten A rankings in each level, unlock the Easter egg, or use the console command, you can play through the bonus level, where you're a pair of Vortigaunts tasked with retrieving the Nylon's healing crystals from Black Mesa. You get to go around mercilessly slaughtering the military with your green lightning, and it's a fun 5 minutes or so. There aren't any multiplayer puzzles this time, so you can run through the whole thing with just one of them. Not really worth getting A ranks in every level, but it's a nice bonus, I guess. At the end of the day, Decay does very little new with the Half-Life formula and is basically just a Half-Life co-op level pack. It has some enjoyable moments, and if you get the multiplayer working, I'm sure it can be a good time, and it'll last you a few hours. But unless you're a Half-Life superfan who wants to experience every part of the series, I think it's safe to skip Decay. Number 9. Half-Life Blue Shift. Blue Shift is the second of the 3 Gearbox expansions made for the original Half-Life, and features Gordon's security guard friend, Barney Calhoun, aka the only character from the expansions that Valve has allowed to become part of their canon. Maybe. It's possible that the Barney scene in Half-Life 2 is just based on the idea of the Barney scene in Blue Shift, since this Barney doesn't have much characterization aside from being late to his job, like Gordon. Either way, this allows for us to see the Black Mesa incident from the perspective of someone else who works there. Blue Shift is good. And that's about the best thing I could say about it. If you're looking for more Half-Life, then you're pretty set playing this, because that's exactly what it is. It feels like an additional level pack to Half-Life, and does very little that's new. Just like with Decay, the experience of playing Blue Shift is near identical to that of the main game, just with different arm skins this time. You get the same basic arsenal that Gordon has, only without the cool experimental weapons or alien bioweapons. Coming off of playing Opposing Force, the first expansion, which reveled in its use of unique weaponry, this can feel like a disappointment. The only thing setting Barney apart from the other protagonists, gameplay-wise, is the fact that his armor can't be recharged. He has to replace it with fresh armor from his dead comrades if it gets too heavily damaged. Barney is also not quite as interesting of a perspective to follow as Gordon or Adrian Shepard, or arguably even Colette or Gina. The HEV scientists were all depicted as being at ground zero for the incident, and Shepard is played from an antagonist perspective. Barney is just kind of a guy who was there when all of this went down, and that's how the game's narrative treats him, as your ultimate goal isn't to destroy or contain anything, it's to escape. As a result, the way the narrative resolves isn't nearly as grand or climactic as the finales of Half-Life or Opposing Force, but I will say that's a more immediately conclusive ending than either of those, let alone Decay's ending. If I have to give any points to Blue Shift's storytelling, though, it's in the fact that it's the first time that the Half-Life series opted to create named NPC characters rather than everyone just being a character archetype, something which would be continued into Decay. They're not really compelling or developed characters, but after hearing the same voices and seeing the same models over and over again in the previous campaigns, it's refreshing to have someone like Dr. Rosenberg stick out from the bunch. I also appreciate the fact that the Zen segment of this game is relatively short and not that painful. While I still don't love the somewhat obtuse level design on display, I at least appreciate the fact that there's no awful platforming and the level doesn't go on for too long. Though I do have some questions as to how exactly Barney is able to traverse the border world safely with no HEV suit and presumably no training. I guess he was just really lucky that he got teleported to a place that didn't require any long jumping. I honestly don't have much more to say on Blue Shift. The level design is good, and there are a handful of decent puzzles, and if you're dying to see more of Black Mesa and Zen, then it'll do it for you. But the lack of new weapons and enemies to fight really doesn't help it stand out from Half-Life, especially when factoring in Opposing Force, which came out first and has way more content. This expansion can be completed within a single 2 to 3 hour play session, so it didn't really have the luxury of time to develop and introduce a lot of new concepts to the player. I imagine the same could be said about Gearbox themselves, since they had deadlines to meet and 3 expansions to ship. I do think the experience is worthwhile, and I find it more intuitive to play than Decay, and if you don't want your adventures in Half-Life to end, Blue Shift is a decent way to extend your time at Black Mesa. Just don't expect the visit to blow your mind all over again.
Come look at Calhoun! His body seems to be in some sort of resonance displacement.
Number 8. Half-Life 2 Episode 1. Episode 1 is really good, but really good tends to be on the lesser side of quality when it comes to the Half-Life games, which should be an excellent sign for the games going forward. With that in mind, Episode 1 is a great natural extension of Half-Life 2's story, picking up almost immediately where the previous game left off. The Citadel's in ruins due to the actions of Gordon and Alyx, both of whom have been teleported outside of it due to the influence of the Vortigaunts, and they now have to help the Resistance evacuate City-17 and escape themselves before the Citadel blows. The rest of the game's story is in service to these goals, alternating between a varied group of locations and set pieces as Gordon and Alyx fight their way through different parts of the ruined city. It's fun, and the design is excellent as always, but most of it feels like more Half-Life 2. What sets it apart from something like Blue Shift is the renewed focus on narrative and characters, especially Alyx Vance. While you interacted with Alyx a fair bit in Half-Life 2 and fought alongside her in a couple of extended sequences, your meetings with her were relatively infrequent. Most of the game, Gordon is making his way through City-17 and its outskirts alone, aided by the rebels every so often until he starts leading their squads in the Uprising. From here, though, Alyx is basically your partner in crime, and she's excellent company. Effective AI partners in narrative-based games are difficult to craft, not just because they need to be at worst unobtrusive and at best helpful to the player, but because they need to be really likable. You're stuck with them for your gameplay experience, so it's essential that the player grows an emotional attachment to them. And Alyx basically set the gold standard for AI partners. She's ultra capable and can take care of herself, able to fight off enemies extremely well on her own, and offers support to you in tight situations throughout the game. She's not invincible, but does have an extremely high rate of health regeneration, meaning that the only way she could die is if she gets absolutely swarmed by enemies and you just sit there and watch. She's sassy and playful despite the dark situation you're both in, and absolutely fierce when facing monsters in the Combine. And yet, because you spend so much time with her, Alyx also has moments where she shows her vulnerability and sadness at the state of things, and displays genuine worry for Gordon. These moments existed in Half-Life 2 as well, but Episode 1 is where you really start to forge a connection with her, one that only gets stronger in Episode 2. Even though Gordon is a silent protagonist, I really bought the idea that these two became so close considering how much they've been through together. From here, Alyx is basically the heart of these games, and became so beloved by fans of the series that she eventually wound up being the main protagonist of her own game years later. But let's stay focused on Episode 1. Like I said, it's essentially more of Half-Life 2, with a handful of new ideas thrown in with the old. The beginning segment of the game lets you play exclusively with the super gravity gun, and it actually takes a little while for you to find your first weapon, meaning you have to rely on the gravity gun and Alyx's assistance in the early chapters. There's actually a somewhat fun achievement challenge of only firing one bullet in the whole game and using the crowbar, gravity gun, grenades, and rocket launcher for the rest of it. It's a pretty interesting way to mix things up on a second or third playthrough. Aside from working together with Alyx, you'll encounter the new grenade-wielding zombie enemy, antlion spawns that you have to plug up with cars, and a section near the end of the game where, well, we'll get to it. The new ideas are nice, and obviously there's no need to fix what wasn't broken before, but I can't help but feel when I'm replaying Episode 1 that's mostly filler to get to the story of Episode 2, which is where the meat really is. The narrative is overall pretty thin right now despite the focus it's given, and most of the story is just fight your way out of City 17. There is some intrigue with Mossman's message and the data packet that the Combine are hunting Alyx and Gordon for, as well as the presence of the advisors, but again, those are mysteries to be solved in Episode 2. I'm sure that's a plotline that we'll get plenty of closure on with no loose threads hanging whatsoever. Right? I mostly enjoyed my time in Episode 1, but the weakest part of the game is unquestionably a sequence near the end where you have to escort civilians to the train station. It requires going through the same area 5 times and facing off against the Combine in different configurations while trying to keep the civilians from dying. Some of them are armed and some are even medics, which can help you out, but it's pretty transparently a way to extend the runtime by about 20 minutes. At least there's some leniency to rescuing the civilians, and the only thing you'll lose by letting some of them die is an achievement, and maybe a little of your pride. The final encounter of the game is a Strider battle, and it's pretty standard stuff. The challenge is getting to a high level where the rocket crate is, fighting Combine soldiers as you go, but once you get there, it's a piece of cake. Episode 1 wraps up, and much like Blue Shift, it can be completed in 2 to 3 hours, but I think it's overall a much better experience. Even discounting the strength of the gameplay in Half-Life 2 that Episode 1 is built around, Alyx's transformation into a deuteragonist and the interesting story threads being set up make this a more than worthy playthrough, and an excellent precursor to greatness seen in Episode 2. Number 7. Half-Life Opposing Force. Alright, this is where the games start going from good to great. Opposing Force was the first Gearbox expansion to Half-Life, in which you play as HECU Corporal Adrian Shepard, after he gets stranded in Black Mesa and has to fight for his survival. From the very beginning, the premise is really interesting, playing from the perspective of one of the antagonistic groups you encounter in Half-Life, the same enemy who goes around the facility executing unarmed civilians and is bent on hunting down Gordon Freeman, the only person who can truly resolve things. Opposing Force actually does something pretty interesting to toy with these built-in motivations, by having Shepard's helicopter crash before his orders are given. He's revived by a scientist and often has to work together with scientists and security guards to move forward in his journey. They hint at the orders he's been given, and there's one case where violence against the scientist is shown more explicitly, but it's ultimately in your hands whether or not to attack these people that might otherwise help you. Something that helps Opposing Force stand out in comparison to Half-Life, or the other expansions for that matter, is the fact that it does the best job at expanding upon the already excellent gameplay ideas of the original by far. The experience of playing as Adrian Shepard is completely different to that of Gordon Freeman. The range of new weapons definitely helps with this, like swapping out the crowbar for a wrench and a knife, a Desert Eagle instead of the revolver, and a sniper rifle replacing the crossbow. Each of these new weapons provides a completely different feel to what they're replacing, but still serve similar functions. Where it gets really fun are the entirely new weapons, like the Displacer Cannon, which can teleport enemies away and teleport yourself to different locations in Xen to get some pickups. There are also a myriad of alien bioweapons to choose from. One of the most notable of these is more of a utility than a weapon, being a detached barnacle that can stick to surfaces with biological matter and pull Shepard onto them, kind of like the hook shot in Zelda. Along with a range of new weapons is a variety of new enemies to fight. There are some aliens recycled from Half-Life that mostly show up at the beginning, but that all changes about a quarter of the way through the game, when we get introduced to Race X, a whole new alien faction that brings with it an entirely new set of challenges. They hit hard and they hit fast, so you always have to be on your toes around them. The same can be said about the enemy human faction and opposing force, the Black Ops seen in Half-Life. Aside from silencing the Black Mesa personnel and stemming the alien invasion, they're apparently here to eliminate the HECU as well, presumably due to failing their mission, and to completely destroy the Black Mesa facility via thermonuclear warhead. In addition to the agile and deadly female assassins seen previously are a male variant, who act like a faster, more durable, and more silent version of the HECU soldiers. They're a huge step up threat-wise from the already dangerous soldiers you fought in Half-Life. The presence of Race X and the Black Ops can often make opposing force a significantly more difficult game than even a lot of Half-Life's most trying encounters, occasionally to my frustration. But you're not always going it alone. A new squad mechanic has been introduced to help you work together with other surviving soldiers. Aside from recruiting them for combat, which can be done in person or over radio, you can also enlist the help of engineers to break down metal doors, and medics to heal your wounds. I wouldn't call them the most effective AI partners, especially if you happen to accidentally shoot them and cause them to turn on you, but they are generally better equipped to deal with oncoming danger than the Black Mesa security guards. If nothing else, they're at least good distractions for the enemy while you shoot at them. I think this expansion does a really great job at making us sympathize with the HECU to a certain extent, because at the end of the day, they're stranded in the facility just trying to survive, pinned between the aliens and Black Ops, not too different from the situation that the Black Mesa personnel are stuck in. Sure, they're trying to kill Gordon Freeman, but as far as they know, he's a single gun-toting maniac who's been on a rampage against their brothers in arms, so that's at least understandable. Speaking of Gordon, there's a moment where his story and Shepard's intersect, just as he leaves through the portal to Xen. If you choose to follow him, Shepard spawns over empty space in the first Xen level and falls to his death, and the postmortem states that he tried to create a time paradox by breaking the canon of Half-Life. That's honestly a pretty great way to make these two stories collide in a way that's neither obnoxious nor very intrusive. Obviously, Shepard and Freeman can't encounter each other on the battlefield and make both of their stories still function, so this was a pretty novel way of getting around that. As much as I enjoy opposing force, I don't think it's perfect. While the increased difficulty can be fun, the way that the difficulty has been raised sometimes gets on my nerves. This game frequently likes to pile enemies onto you, and it can get exhausting, especially when moving between set pieces without adequate health pickups to supplement you. This might be to encourage use of self-teleportation via the Displacer Cannon, but if you've been using its ammo to attack enemies instead, you won't have many options. Some of the level design also irritates me from both the gameplay and narrative standpoint, like how you go through this explosive rig supply yard fighting Black Ops, only to wind up in a pitch-black sewer surrounded by giant alien enemies, and the best way to get through it is to hope you're lucky and evade them for long enough to get to the next loading screen. Sure, you could fight them, but their health is high and your ammo probably isn't after the previous encounter with the Black Ops, so it's not really worth it. At the end of it, guess where you wind up? Back at one of the warehouses on the surface in the same map you were in before, except now the Black Ops have blown it up and you have to fight the aliens instead. So was the whole sewer debacle just so that you weren't above ground when everything blew up? What was the point other than padding? Opposing Force's narrative is its weakest attribute, honestly. While it's cool to get expanded lore about Black Mesa and Xen, the actual story is almost non-existent. After you crash, your motivation is to reunite with your comrades and escape Black Mesa, since at that point the mission is already foobar. But thanks to the interference of the G-Man, you miss the last flight out of there, and the game loses any narrative drive it once had. From here on out, you're just wandering around, occasionally encountering your fellow soldiers who are also left behind, while slaughtering the Black Ops and Race X. Say what you will about the story of Half-Life, but at least Gordon had goals that were clearly communicated throughout the game of reaching the Lambda Complex and then killing the Nihilith. This game's final boss doesn't really have any lead up. A guard just tells you that there's a big nasty up ahead and that you have to kill it. And then you do. And that's how the game ends. The actual boss fight against the Gene Worm, I had to look that up, isn't very compelling either. I wouldn't say the fight against the Nihilith was great, but it did feel something like a challenge. The Gene Worm can be beaten within a couple of minutes once you figure out its rather obvious weak points. Despite these issues, I think Opposing Force is a great companion to Half-Life and worthy of a playthrough if you're looking for more. You'll get over twice the amount of playtime in it compared to Blue Shift. It's kind of a shame that Valve doesn't really acknowledge the canon of this game in any future titles, with the only thing they've confirmed being Black Mesa's ultimate fate. Despite his popularity with fans, Adrian Shepard's fate beyond this game has never been elaborated upon. Apparently he was meant to star as protagonist in the cancelled Return to Ravenholm title by Arcane Studios, but I guess we'll never know what that would have been like. And considering that Valve's recent return to the Half-Life franchise has been with an adventure that doesn't even star Gordon Freeman, I'm not counting on seeing Shepard again anytime soon. Still, his very existence has inspired a number of mods and fanworks over the years, and I think that's a testament to the creative ideas that are at the heart of the Gearbox expansions. Number 6. Half-Life. This is it. This is the progenitor of it all. Not just for the Half-Life series, but also Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, Portal, and Steam, as well as Valve's overwhelming dominance in the PC games market today. It all came from this. Half-Life set a new, influential standard for linear game design and storytelling that's still inspiring games to this very day. Its use of an unbroken first-person perspective from beginning to end, and its methods of telling the story of the Black Mesa incident through its environmental design and scripted sequences makes for one hell of an immersive rollercoaster ride. The way that the subtle hand of the designer guides you through each location, leaving almost no room for confusion, is something I'm continuously impressed by. I'm someone who generally prefers game experiences that allow for more openness and experimentation, being a big immersive sim fan in particular, but I can really appreciate a linear experience that's done well, and Half-Life pulls me in every time. A lot of Valve's design philosophy centers around taking the player from set piece to set piece, constantly toying with expectations by adding in new elements that build on each other and gradually escalate into a series of climactic encounters. From the introduction of the uncoordinated and dangerous alien wildlife that soon becomes a full-on alien invasion, to the highly organized and surprisingly intelligent military that deploys increasingly powerful resources to combat their targets, this game has absolutely masterful pacing and difficulty progression. For the most part anyway, there are two pretty distinct points in the game where this doesn't hold as true, but the rest of it is pretty fantastic. The ramp up in difficulty throughout the game is accompanied by Gordon's gradual weapon acquisition, starting with the now iconic crowbar for bashing through destructible objects and doing melee damage to enemies, useful throughout the entire game. You gain access to weapons that are now standard in most shooters, like the pistol, shotgun, machine gun, and revolver, as well as explosive arms like grenades and the rocket launcher. Where things get really interesting is the introduction of alien bioweapons, namely the hive hand and the snarks, as well as the experimental weapons like the Tau cannon and the gluon gun. This variety constantly provides you with new tools to test their effectiveness against the enemy types that come up in increasing numbers and durability throughout the game. Part of how Half-Life achieves its great pacing is by alternating between puzzles and combat, sometimes engaging in both simultaneously. Most of the puzzles in the game are navigation-based, usually involving activating a mechanism or a series of mechanisms in order to move forward. Sometimes this means bringing an NPC to a certain area so they can unlock the way forward for you, other times it's pressing a few buttons yourself. There are also a few that involve platforming, which doesn't always work out in the game's favor. It might seem quaint nowadays, but Half-Life was an early example of a first-person shooter that aimed to replicate what could theoretically be considered a real space. Most other shooters at the time, like Doom or Quake, tended to lean into more surreal, fantastical environments, with only a loose story framework to explain the motivations of the player character. By contrast, Half-Life uses its presentation to tell the story, something which is obvious in the first section of the game, where you're riding the tram to work and seeing the Black Mesa facility before it all goes to hell. This is crucial, not only to familiarize you with the setting, but also with basic movement and interaction controls in a safe environment before unleashing the danger upon you. And there is no more perfect vessel through which to experience this game than our 27-year-old HEV suit-wearing theoretical physicist, Gordon Freeman. Gordon is such a unique protagonist to follow. In an age of first-person shooters saturated with over-exaggerated badass military men as player characters, having a glasses-wearing scientist running around in a bright orange suit wielding a crowbar is downright refreshing. And it's a big contributor to Gordon's iconic status. The fact that he's an entirely silent protagonist, with his only characterization being in the form of a brief text rundown of his attributes at the beginning of the game, lends a great deal of mystery to his character. It leaves a lot up to interpretation. Does he see his uncanny ability to survive long odds as something to feel guilt or pain over? Does he view his ability to kill massive numbers of both aliens and people with revulsion or sadistic glee? Does he even care about his fellow scientists at all, or is he just trying to save his own neck? These questions become a lot more interesting to consider when you remember that the game's plot is kickstarted by you, as Gordon, pushing the crystal into the anti-mass spectrometer, making you the one ultimately responsible for the resonance cascade that caused the alien invasion and the domino effect into larger, unforeseen consequences in the sequel games. The fact that you're forced to carry this action out in the gameplay rather than witness it in a cutscene drives home this sense of responsibility even further. Above everything else, the most profound questions I'm left with are, does Gordon feel guilt over causing all of this? And are his actions in the game and the following ones meant to atone for what he's done? Or does he not care and he's just interested in watching the world burn and giving him an excuse to let out violent impulses? These are interesting thoughts to consider while you're out there blasting. I like Half-Life a lot, but there are a few things about it that do bother me. First, and most obvious to others who have played the game, are the most controversial sections, On a Rail and the Zen chapters. On a Rail is a segment about a third of the way into the game, where you're using a powered cart to navigate a series of confusing tunnels while fighting off aliens and the military. Its design is a bit muddled, and you'll probably spend a good amount of time going in circles trying to find the objective, and overall it just goes on for too long. I don't hate it necessarily, but it does outstay its welcome by quite a bit, and there are some frankly annoying sections in it that test my patience. The issues with Zen run a lot deeper. In the last stretch of the game, you'll be sent to the alien border world Zen so you can defeat the final boss and end the alien invasion, and it's pretty universally agreed upon that this is the weakest part of the game. It indulges in a lot of very annoying platforming with your new long jump module, and the level design is at its most obtuse here. There are quite a few environments where the easiest solution is to just rush past all of the enemies because they're so open. They neither do well to facilitate combat nor motivate you to go out of your way to fight the enemies. Zen itself is also just kind of ugly looking, part of which is just due to the age of the game, which makes everything kind of ugly, but I think a lot of it is a design issue too. It's very abstract in its visuals, which clashes pretty hard with the more grounded design of the rest of the game set on Earth. And since you're teleporting around a lot to these floating islands, it makes Zen feel less like a unified world and more like a series of small maps that you hop between. I'm also not a huge fan of the final boss battle against the giant floating demon baby. The Nihilith has a cool design, but the fight against it is very fragmented and slow. He'll fire fast-moving electric projectiles at you every so often, as well as homing portals that teleport you to another environment with more enemies and supplies, which just feels like an artificial way to drag out the boss fight. You can exploit the obstacles in the room to block the Nihilith's attacks, and this makes the fight a cakewalk once you figure it out. It's overall a pretty underwhelming way to end the game. All of that said, there are things that I like about Zen. I like how it conveys the state of slavery that the Vortigaunts are in without any dialogue by having them work in the alien grunt factory, and how it shows that the grunts are essentially alien bioweapons themselves, being manufactured for the invasion. Even though graphically the border world looks ugly, it definitely succeeds in appearing very alien in its architecture, and the factory is the strongest example of this. I think the Gonarch fight is pretty good for the most part, and I like how it uses its own offspring to attack you and be a minor nuisance. And while I found the Nihilith fight to have inconsistent pacing, the final animation that plays when you defeat it is pretty damn satisfying to watch. I have a few other issues with the game that aren't Zen related, like anytime it tries to get you to do precise platforming. Half-Life doesn't have the most slippery controls compared to other FPSs from the time, but it's still not quite precise enough to reliably maneuver some of the platforming environments, even before getting to Zen. My patience for the teleporting enemies also really starts to run thin by the end of the game, especially when you've just cleared a room and have very little health left, and then suddenly you get instantly ambushed. It gets really old. And while I appreciate the narrative delivery of Half-Life, that doesn't mean that I love the story itself, which mostly feels like an excuse plot to justify the player slaughtering countless scores of aliens and military. It doesn't really have much emotional weight to it, mainly because there are no named characters other than Gordon Freeman, and no important ones besides him and the G-Man. And Gordon's a silent protagonist, so any characterization on his part is mostly inferred by the player. Half-Life doesn't really have characters so much as it has character archetypes: the timid scientist, the lighthearted security guard, the serious marine.
Sabotage, maybe? Yeah, maybe. All I know for sure is he's been killing my buddies. Oh yeah, he'll pay. He will definitely pay.
Future titles would retroactively establish important characters who were a part of Black Mesa, but if you've only played this game, then you'd be forgiven for not having any emotional investment in trying to stop the alien invasion for the sake of the Black Mesa personnel. Still, despite its age and its problems, Half-Life is still a ton of fun, and a fantastic first chapter in what would become one of the greatest video game franchises of all time. It was the beginning of Valve's dominating success as a company, and the start of their pro-modding ethos that led to the creation of dozens of great fan works, some of which have ascended into full-on games or even franchises themselves. We all owe it to Half-Life, and I can't imagine what video games would look like today without it.
Wisely done, Mr. Freeman. I will see you up ahead.
Number 5. Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Episode 2 is awesome. While Episode 1 fulfilled its purpose of setting up this new part of the story, Episode 2 fully justifies its own existence by expanding upon the locations, set pieces, and even character relationships seen in this fascinating universe. Having escaped City 17, it's now up to Gordon and Alyx to deliver the data packet they stole from the Combine to the Resistance base in White Forest, so they can prevent the Combine from opening another portal to their homeworld and gaining reinforcements. We get a new setting, new characters, new enemies, new gameplay mechanics, everything you could ask for that can be added on top of the already fantastic foundation that is Half-Life 2. On top of all of that is a new intriguing narrative that gets you emotionally invested in a way that the Half-Life series hasn't really achieved until now. Like with Episode 1, you spend most of it with Alyx, who is still an excellent character and AI partner, but Episode 2 does something that really strengthens the bond between her and the player. It makes her almost die. At the beginning of the game, she's fatally wounded by a new enemy, the Combine Hunter, in a brilliant sequence where you're helpless to do anything but watch as it happens. This has a twofold effect of making the player worry for Alyx and establish the Hunter as a very dangerous and personal threat. Luckily, you both get saved by a Vortigaunt, who stabilizes Alyx and helps you obtain a larval extract from the antlion nest in the nearby mines in order to save her life. After a long and very fun series of sequences where you have to defend the unconscious Alyx, fight the new acid-spitting antlions, and avoid a rampaging Guardian who you're not allowed to kill yet, the Vortigaunts heal her by bonding Gordon's life to hers, making the connection between the two of them something beyond just emotional. Throughout most of the rest of the game, Alyx is back to being your steadfast partner, and continues to be a great emotional core for the story and for communicating the intensity of the events around you. When the Hunters ambush you a second time, and Alyx insists that they're not going to catch her off guard again, I felt more determined than ever to kill them despite how tough they were, not just out of revenge, but out of a desire to keep her safe and prevent them from hurting her again. That's how you know that a character has left an emotional impact on you. It makes this game's gut punch of an ending hit even harder, but I'm not going to talk about that. Those Hunters, by the way, an excellent addition to the roster of enemies. Like most of the Combine forces, they're a cybernetic bioweapon used to hunt down our protagonists, and they are as ruthless as they are fast and agile. They fire exploding fletchets at you and will often try to charge you if you get too close, and they can take a lot of punishment. To defeat them requires you being as fast or faster than them and using your resources creatively. You can chuck large items and explosives at them with a gravity gun, as long as you do it before said explosives are hit with the fletchets and explode in your hands. You can run them over with the car, but make sure you close the distance before they have a chance to dodge out of the way. On their own, they're formidable. Teamed up with other Combine forces, they're downright deadly. The majority of the game takes place on the road through the woodlands as you and Alyx race the Combine to White Forest, driving a beat-up car the rebels retrofitted for use, similar to driving the airboat or the buggy in Half-Life 2. The difference is that you now have Alyx as a passenger, and aside from the pleasant company she brings, she can also shoot at enemies for you or point out oddities as you pass them by. You'll stop frequently and get ambushed by the Combine at varying levels of intensity, and you'll also get a lot of practice driving, which will very much come in handy in the game's climax. Episode 2 doesn't introduce a ton of new enemies, but it makes the most out of what it already has by having you deal with old threats in new ways, and there's no better example of this than the final battle. When you arrive at White Forest, your objective is now to protect the Resistance rocket from the Combine while they prepare to launch it, and you do this by making a last stand against an invasion of Striders, who are being escorted by Hunters. Striders normally take several hits from a rocket launcher to go down, so instead, the grumpy new scientist Dr. Magnuson creates a device you can launch onto them with a gravity gun and shoot to instantly kill them. It sounds simple, but the Hunters don't make this easy, as they'll shoot and destroy your device if you don't deal with them. You have to drive around the valley picking up the devices from different outposts, which the Striders can also destroy if you're not quick enough. And if you miss the target or take too long to shoot the device once it's on the Strider, you've got to rush to get a new one. It's intense, requires quick thinking on your feet, and is a wholly creative new way to deal with an old enemy. Also, I just love the fact that Dr. Magnuson holds a grudge against you, not for causing the resonance cascade and the subsequent downfall of humanity, but for blowing up his microwave casserole at Black Mesa. That's just so funny to me. There are a few minor nitpicks I have, but for the most part they don't detract much from the experience. Episode 2 introduced a new glitch where getting hit with the antlion acid causes your screen to flash white every time you take damage for the rest of the game, which is very annoying, and it seems like Valve isn't interested in fixing the problem. Or maybe they eventually did, since it didn't happen to me on my latest playthrough. Who knows? It's almost made up for by them finally separating the flashlight power meter from your oxygen and stamina, which has been long overdue. The bigger issue I have with this game is the infamous gnome achievement, where you have to carry this gnome object from the beginning of the game to the rocket near the end. This is already aggravating enough to pull off when keeping track of it in combat, but it is made infinitely worse when driving, and you have to stop the car every 5 seconds because the gnome goes flying off if you go above 10 miles an hour. In a vacuum, this doesn't bother me personally much anymore because I got the achievement years ago, but I will never forgive Episode 2 for starting this trend of carrying an object from the beginning of the game to the end for an achievement in Half-Life 2 mods. Even Black Mesa did this with 2 objects instead of 1, and one of those objects is round and prone to rolling away. But that's a rant for another day. Episode 2 concludes by giving us the most infamous and devastating cliffhanger in the history of video games, one which we've been waiting for Valve to resolve for over a decade and a half now. It really sucks that we'll probably never see the true conclusion to this planned trilogy, and I can't say I'm altogether too happy about that. Looking at it as a standalone though, Episode 2 tells a perfectly good story that has over twice the amount of playtime as Episode 1, with great characters and a solid emotional core. I honestly struggle to think of anything wrong with it design-wise, aside from the cliffhanger ending, which is more of an issue contingent on the non-existence of a third entry. If you can handle knowing that this is as far as the Half-Life timeline will go, then I think you owe it to yourself to play these episodes if you're a fan of Half-Life 2.
Relay these words. Prepare for unforeseen consequences.
Number 4. Portal. You know, when I really think about it, Portal is kind of miraculously brilliant. Like, in the most unexpected, extraordinary way possible. This short little bonus game that came in the orange box, along with Half-Life 2, the episodes, and Team Fortress 2, a puzzle spin-off set in the Half-Life universe, somehow managed to not only become the most famous and notable of this already ridiculously prestigious and popular collection of games, but also managed to eclipse the Half-Life series in terms of pop culture relevance to the point that I'd argue it's now Valve's primary mascot. They have made 3 promotional spin-off games in the Aperture Science universe and have lent the rights to the property to several other developers, and it is referenced by more games than I can possibly count. Much like the series it originally spun off from, its influence has had a massive ripple effect throughout game development, in terms of first-person puzzle design and writing in games. In Portal, you play as Chell, a test subject at the Aperture Science Computer-Aided Enrichment Center, the primary rival to Black Mesa, which was referenced in Episode 2. You're tasked with running the gamut of test chambers in the facility with the portal gun, which can, well, make 2 connected portals on surfaces. Each test chamber is a dangerous gauntlet that mixes together different puzzle elements in a slow but well-paced escalation of difficulty, kind of like in the Half-Life games. All the while, you're being observed by GLaDOS, an omnipresent AI who seems to be glitching at strangely convenient times, and saying some questionable things, but promises cake and grief counseling at the end of the test. Portal's origins are pretty interesting. A group of students at DigiPen Institute of Technology had developed a game called Narbacular Drop, which involves some now familiar concepts of placing 2 connected portals around an environment in order to navigate it and solve puzzles. A Valve developer saw the game at DigiPen's career fair and got the students to pitch it to Gabe Newell, who hired them to develop it further, and it eventually evolved into the game we know today. This was an extremely small team, less than 10 people, who took a little over 2 years to develop the game, and the reason it was set in the Half-Life universe was simply because they were trying to reuse assets and save resources. And I'd argue the game came out better for it in the end. I can't stress enough how amazing it was that Portal turned out so incredible despite its humble origins. Portal is remarkably accessible as a game, managing to deal with some rather complex puzzle concepts while using relatively simple controls. The only tool you need in order to solve these puzzles is your trusty portal gun. The rest of the controls are the standard FPS fare with a few trade-offs. For example, you can't run, but you do have regenerating health if you encounter a hazard that doesn't kill you in a single hit. Since you'll be falling and jumping large distances frequently, fall damage is completely non-existent. One of the core tenets of the puzzle design is how it emphasizes using your own momentum, which is preserved while traveling through portals, in order to navigate the test chambers. Or, in layman's terms,
speedy thing goes in, speedy thing comes out.
Just like Half-Life 2, Portal takes full advantage of the Source Engine's physics as a way to interact with the environment and move forward in the game. The pacing is perfect. There are only 19 test chambers, and each one takes its time introducing concepts to the player and building upon those concepts as the game goes on, bringing them together in spectacular ways in the final levels, where all of your skills will be tested. Whether this be placing buttons on cubes, launching yourself through the air, guiding energy pellets, or avoiding turrets, or doing all of this at once, Portal always has a new idea for you to explore. And what carries this string of chambers through is the excellent writing on display from the only character besides the player, your AI guide, GLaDOS.
You're not a good person. You know that, right?
This robotic voice in the sky who's always watching you through the cameras is equal parts hilarious and menacing.
Due to mandatory scheduled maintenance, the appropriate chamber for this testing sequence is currently unavailable. It has been replaced with a live fire course designed for military androids. The Enrichment Center apologizes for the inconvenience and wishes you the best of luck.
Voiced to perfection by the incredibly talented Ellen McLean, who also voices the turrets in this game and the Combine Overwatch voice in the Half-Life 2 games, GLaDOS has earned her place as an iconic antagonist and one of the most famous AI characters in all of video games. Hell, in all of fiction. She starts out as something of a guide for the player, explaining some of the basic concepts of Portal's puzzle design, but you'll start to notice how strange she is. She'll frequently glitch or skip dialogue that seems important, and she has a tendency to say ridiculous or extreme things in a completely serious, deadpan manner, which is where a lot of the game's humor comes from.
Well done, Android. The Enrichment Center once again reminds you that Android Hell is a real place where you will be sent at the first sign of defiance.
As the test chambers gradually become more deadly and the environmental design starts giving signs that maybe things aren't as they seem at Aperture, you begin to get the sense that GLaDOS' promise of cake at the end of the test is untrue. Speaking of environmental design, I absolutely love it. Aperture Science has got a very distinct look to it, and I appreciate the fact that it looks like it belongs in the Half-Life universe, with its gritty textures and some shared assets, but manages to still be its own thing by sticking to a mostly clinical and clean appearance. It manages to communicate its puzzle design through simple colors, with you being able to shoot portals on white surfaces but not on black ones. This is contrasted wonderfully with the back areas of Aperture, which look far more industrial and dirty, and much more outwardly dangerous. The subtle details at work help create this lonely mood, like the fact that all of the observation windows are empty and Aperture as a whole seems devoid of any human employees. It's just you and GLaDOS. Then there are the eerie messages and scrawlings left in the areas behind the walls that seem to warn of something ominous, hinting at GLaDOS' true nature. And it all comes to a head when the testing ends and it turns out that, yeah, GLaDOS is actively trying to kill you. After a super fun escape sequence which utilizes a lot of the skills you've learned throughout the game, while GLaDOS tries to trap and guilt trip you, you eventually confront her and are forced to take her down.
Well, you found me. Congratulations. Was it worth it? Because despite your violent behavior, the only thing you've managed to break so far is my heart.
The actual boss fight is pretty simple, but entertaining, especially if you listen to GLaDOS' dialogue and taunts throughout. This is where she says some of her best lines, so I recommend taking your time with it, as much as the neurotoxin timer allows, that is.
There was even going to be a party for you. A big party that all your friends were invited to. I invited your best friend, companion Q. Of course, he couldn't come because you murdered him. Oh, you think you're doing some damage?
2 + 2 is...
In phase 4, I'm fine. Neurotoxin. So deadly. I'm joking.
Kidding.
After GLaDOS is defeated and you're dragged back into the facility, you get to hear GLaDOS sing about how she's still alive as a nice send-off. Portal is an instantly iconic game, and it's influenced a whole host of other first-person puzzle games that try to replicate success to varying degrees. It's memorable, funny, extremely well designed, and very accessible. If you somehow have never played it, please go pick it up. It's not that long, you could beat the main campaign in 2 or 3 hours, but it will be worth every minute. And if you finish it and you're really itching for more Portal, there are the advanced chambers and challenge rooms to complete, or you could explore the myriad of free community-created mods that this game inspired, showing a wide range of creativity. Bottom line, Portal is amazing, and I can't imagine where the gaming world would be without it. Go check it out if you haven't already. Number 3. Half-Life Alyx. Picture it. The year is 2019. It's been 12 whole years since Episode 2 was released, and the Half-Life franchise has since been seemingly abandoned by its creators. Though the fandom is kept active by a robust community of modders and storytellers, even Valve's most hardcore fans are beginning to, or have already long given up hope that the company would ever return to the Half-Life universe. I know I sure did, especially after the ex-head writer of the series, Mark Laidlaw, released his proposed story for Episode 3 on a blog when he retired. As a whole, it seemed like Valve was done with single-player games, with their last release being Portal 2 in 2011. It was time to accept that the story would remain unfinished. And then November rolled around, and Valve dropped the single biggest bombshell announcement they'd made in over a decade.
Alyx? Alyx! I'm here. So what's the plan?
Half-Life Alyx, an interquel set between Half-Life and Half-Life 2, where you play as Alyx Vance during the height of the Combine's rule over Earth. This news couldn't possibly be more incredible and exciting to me, and I'm sure many others felt the same about it. But there were two really big, uncomfortable sticking points to contend with in this announcement. The first was that this was an interquel, not a sequel to Episode 2, so it obviously wouldn't resolve the long unfinished story of Half-Life 2. The second, perhaps more devastatingly, was that Half-Life Alyx was a VR exclusive game, made primarily to sell the Valve Index. I'm sure I wasn't the only person who felt a unique mix of elation and disappointment that day. There was a good chance that a not insignificant portion of the Half-Life fandom wouldn't get to experience this game. Half-Life Alyx would release 4 months later to critical and likely commercial success, with people praising it as VR's first killer app, and it eventually won Best VR Game in 2020. I've been definitely avoiding spoilers for this game for 3 years now, on the off chance that I get my hands on a VR headset, and this year I finally did. And it's my absolute pleasure to say that the rumors are true. Half-Life Alyx is the best VR game ever made, and is yet to be dethroned in the 3 years since its release. It's not even close. It is the single most immersive experience I've ever had playing a video game, outdoing all the previous Half-Life titles and even the immersive sims that I love. And best of all, it made me remember why I fell in love with this franchise and its universe in the first place. All of that said, it's still a very different experience from playing the other Half-Life games. Let's start with the combat. The flow and pace of combat feels drastically different, in a way that works but is still an adjustment if you're coming straight off of the other titles. In those games, it wasn't too unusual for the player to be mowing down large numbers of enemies while running or jumping throughout an environment to gain the best advantage. But since HLA is in VR, that's no longer really an ideal option for most players. As a result, enemies don't attack you in numbers as large as before, and combat emphasizes exploiting weaknesses rather than riddling the enemies with bullets. For example, zombies sometimes have pulsing green spots on their bodies, which can be shot to kill them instantly, and some Combine soldiers wear explosive tanks or grenades that are vulnerable to gunfire. Their attacks won't be as aggressive as in past games, but defeating them often requires determining the best strategy from the position you're in, rather than running in guns blazing. Alyx doesn't have an HEV suit, and despite her regenerating health seen in the Half-Life 2 games, she's rather vulnerable here. Instead of a numbered health meter, she simply has 3 hearts that shrink and disappear when she gets injured, and can be restored at Combine health stations or with health injections. While past games saw the player having access to a large number of weapons, Alyx only gains 3 throughout this game: the pistol, shotgun, and submachine gun, plus she can carry grenades in her extra storage. Despite this limited loadout, the new upgrade system is what makes up for it. Throughout your journey, you'll find a material called resin if you scrounge around, and this can be used at Combine upgrade stations in order to add enhancements to your weapons, like aim assists or ammo reservoirs. This can add a dynamism to the combat without necessarily needing to give the player new weapons to juggle all the time, and I think is a change that really works well with HLA. One of the challenges in combat comes from an aspect of this game that adds immersion, namely the fact that you need to manually reload all of your weapons yourself, and that includes remembering to cock the guns that require it. There's no UI constantly floating in front of your face, so that means paying attention to the indicators on your gun showing how much ammo you have left, and knowing when exactly to duck and cover when reloading. No UI also means no crosshair, so you have to make sure you line up your shots or you'll waste ammo real fast. If you're making the jump from other games to this, it can be quite an adjustment, but it sure does make for a tense and exhilarating combat experience. If I'm being honest though, the most fun I've had with HLA hasn't been the combat, it's just been the interaction you can experience with the world around you. With the Source 2 engine comes an even more advanced physics engine, one which enables fine precision and manipulation of the objects around you. Control of the objects in the world is now better than ever, since you have 2 hands to pick things up, rotate them, and throw them. All guns only require 1 hand to operate, so you could easily hold something else in the other hand, like a grenade you're ready to throw. What enhances the experience of interacting with these physics objects are Alyx's gravity gloves, a prototype to the gravity gun which allows you to pull distant objects towards you. I've played other VR games that have a version of this for the sake of convenience, but what I love about the gloves in particular is the action of flicking your wrist to pull an object and needing to catch it in time. There's just something so satisfying about it that I can't quite explain. Maybe it has something to do with the realistic arcs that these objects travel in, affected by the physics engine. It makes me wish that I had this ability in real life. I mean, who wouldn't? Another super important aspect of the immersion that HLA nails is the look and feel of City 17, set 5 years before the events of Half-Life 2. The Combine's rule at this point is absolute, and this can be seen through their utilitarian technology encroaching upon the existing 20th century Eastern European buildings, while the forgotten parts of the city are infested with headcrabs, zombies, barnacles, and various flora from Xen. The thing I find most impressive about these visuals is how seamlessly Valve has translated the stellar art direction in Half-Life 2 to a new engine with improved graphical capabilities, while still looking like part of the same universe. Familiar elements like the Combine soldiers, headcrabs, and Vortigaunts are all upgraded with much more detailed models and animations, and fit right in alongside newer elements added into the game. Environments are chock full of detail, and every location is meticulously designed, making the world you're exploring feel rich and lived in. HLA also has great memorable characters, following the trend set by Half-Life 2. Alyx Vance is the first player character in the series to be voiced, and while this younger version of her is not quite as sassy as she was in her previous appearances, she's still an enjoyable character to follow and a great player avatar.
Alyx, I think that's a combine fabricator. Put something in it. I want to see how this thing works.
Got it. Will it work on the Russells?
No, but it should fix up that pistol nicely. Good thing, too. I gave you one of my lesser guns.
Thanks, Russell.
Well, you know, in case it doesn't make it back.
Tell you what, Russell. If I die, I owe you a gun.
You owe me a gun anyway. That wasn't a gift. That's my gun.
She was recast from her original voice actress, Merle Dandridge, to a younger one since Valve thought she didn't fit the voice of a younger Alyx anymore, but I think the new VA, Ozioma Akaga, does a pretty good job of imitating what came before, and I like her performance.
So, when we get the Combine off of Earth, what are you gonna do?
I'm going full production mode on the Russells, of course.
Oh, of course. You'll be sitting on a landmine.
Gold mine, yep.
I think the banter that Alyx has with Russell, the Resistance member who helps guide her throughout the game, is pretty charming and fun. I like how she's shown to be scared of the dark and wants him to talk to her while she's in dark places to distract her, or how he will explain aspects about the world before the invasion to Alyx, someone who's never known a world without the Combine in it. Russell himself is also an entertaining character. He's a newcomer, but his presence is much appreciated. He's funny and helpful, kind of a talkative nerd who doesn't have much in the way of tact or a filter, and will sometimes ramble on about inane subjects.
You know, Russell, now that I'm walking into the quarantine zone, it just hit me. I don't know anything about the quarantine zone.
Well, actually, the word quarantine comes from the Italian 40 giorni, which means 40 days, the period that all ships were required to be isolated before crew could go ashore during the Black Death.
All right. Cool.
Despite that, it's clear how much he cares about Alyx and is willing to help her rescue her father from the Combine. Eli is also present, of course, and while we don't see him too much throughout the course of the game, I do appreciate the moments between him and Alyx that show how much they love and trust in one another. The Vortigaunts are also back, cryptic as ever, and I really like seeing Alyx's reactions to their odd behavior in real time. The story is a little difficult to talk about. Don't worry, I won't spoil anything. I know a lot of people haven't gotten the chance to play the game yet. I myself have been dodging spoilers for Half-Life Alyx for years now, to varying degrees of effectiveness. All I'll say is that it's well-paced and well-told, and has some interesting reveals and implications for the greater Half-Life universe. Despite its status as an interquel, it actually does contain some information relevant to Episode 2, so make sure you complete the other Half-Life games before coming to this one. You'll get more out of it that way, trust me. I'm aware that an outsized amount of Half-Life fans won't be able to experience Alyx in the way the developers intended, which is super unfortunate. They might want to turn to the No VR mod that's being developed as a way to play it on a mouse and keyboard. While I can understand having to do so in order to play the game at all, I think playing it this way kind of takes away from the experience. Not just from an immersion standpoint, but from a gameplay standpoint as well. The level of control you had in VR was unprecedented, and allowed you to play the game in dynamic ways that traditional mouse and keyboard simply can't offer. Half-Life Alyx was made for VR platforms. You can take Alyx out of VR, but you can't take the VR out of Alyx, you know? If this is really your only way to play the game, then go ahead and use no VR, but if there's any chance at all that you might someday get a hold of a VR headset, I promise you, the wait will be so worth it. Half-Life Alyx is truly a crowning achievement in VR game development, and it's the #1 reason to own a VR headset in my eyes. Yeah, it's only one game, but the great thing about it is that HLA has Steam Workshop support, enabling anyone who owns it to make their own modifications, maps, and campaigns, extending its life through user-generated content and continuing the tradition that began with the very first Half-Life, of custom mods created by the community. Also, if you're looking for more VR Half-Life, there are excellent mods that convert Half-Life 2 and the episodes to VR, which can be downloaded free on Steam if you own those games. I have basically no complaints, even stuff that usually annoys me in other games, like hacking minigames or carrying a gnome from the beginning of the game to the end for an achievement, because yes, that's in this game too. Don't bother me here because of the unique ways they're implemented in VR. If you own a headset and you're a fan of Half-Life, you owe it to yourself to play this game. Hell, even if you've never played a Half-Life game before, you should still play it. It made me excited to see the potential that VR holds, and for the first time in over a decade, hopeful for the future of the Half-Life franchise. Number 2, Portal 2. Portal 2 is a game that's very special to me. It was the very first game I owned from either of these franchises and was my gateway into PC gaming. I didn't know anything about Portal or Half-Life or the history of Valve and Steam. I was just a 13-year-old kid who saw an ad for this weird game about shooting portals on walls while an AI lady sassed you about your performance, and decided I wanted more than anything to try it. So I convinced my grandmother to buy it for me, yes, the physical edition, and installed it on my 2010 Mac. Along with the game came this application called Steam, which annoyed me at first because Portal 2 relied on this app to open and Steam wouldn't always cooperate on my not super fast computer. Young me wouldn't realize the potential of this strange app until later, when it came to define my experience playing games for the next several years of my life. Portal 2 is, in every sense of the word, a perfect follow-up to its predecessor. While jumping from the previous game to this one doesn't feel like as big of a leap as going from Half-Life to Half-Life 2, Portal 2 still manages to be consistently fresh and innovative, with sharper writing than ever. It expands upon the already incredibly creative gameplay concepts that Portal came up with, as well as the story and lore of Aperture Science, taking us through monuments to its forgotten past, and exploring what eventually led to its downfall. You play as Chell once again, having woken up from her suspended sleep after an unknown amount of time has passed since the events of Portal. It's not clear exactly how long, but something tells me it's been a while.
Good morning. You have been in suspension for 99999.
A personality core named Wheatley wakes you and tries to escape with you, but winds up accidentally reactivating GLaDOS, who traps Chell and forces her to continue with testing. Unlike the first game, Portal 2 is a full-fledged release with a single-player campaign that runs for over twice as long as the first game, which allows for narrative delivery and puzzle solving between test chambers as well as while you're in them. Aperture Science has been upgraded with a bit of a shift in its art style, now looking a bit less derivative of Half-Life 2 and more like its own thing. There's a lot of emphasis on the colors blue and orange, just like with the portals, and overall the environments feel more visually cohesive, even when they're also meant to look dilapidated and unkempt. The transformation of the visuals throughout the game is something that I really like, going from decayed and abandoned, to clean and clinical, reminiscent of the first game, to old and forgotten, to haphazardly stitched together. All of these changes happen across the events of a single playthrough, and the story progression makes them feel natural. I also appreciate how often you find yourself away from the test chambers, exploring previously unseen parts of Aperture. The puzzle design is excellent, as I've pretty much come to expect, and the addition of new gameplay elements is super welcome. The initial test chambers are slightly modified versions of the first one seen in Portal, as a way of familiarizing the player with some basic concepts before you acquire the single portal gun and start solving a new gauntlet of momentum-based tests. After GLaDOS' awakening, that's when the new elements start being introduced, such as redirection cubes, lasers, aerial faith plates, and hard light bridges, all of which have the potential for really interesting interactions with your portals and with each other. Later in the game, you're introduced to the excursion funnel, and most significantly, the gels. Based off of the design of another student project developed at DigiPen called Tag the Power of Paint, these three gels dramatically alter navigation both in and out of test chambers. The blue gel bounces you, orange increases your speed, and white creates a new portal surface. They're introduced about halfway through the game, and they really bring the puzzle design to a whole new level, especially when they're combined with some of the other puzzle elements previously mentioned. A few classic elements do still remain, such as the cube and buttons and the turrets that make you feel guilty for killing them, although the energy pellets have been retired in favor of the lasers. There have also been some quality of life improvements from the first game, such as automatically adjusting your position when you're falling into a portal, or adjusting where your portal ends up when you aim at a wall. Portals also travel at the speed of light now, which unfortunately means there's no more ducking in and out of them between shots. In general, the different ways that you could exploit the physics of the source engine to cheese the game or intentionally get yourself stuck have been removed, and the experience is a lot more controlled. I do somewhat miss the exploits that were previously left over from the Half-Life 2 code, but I think it's a worthwhile trade-off for cleaner gameplay. Having objects I'm holding guaranteed to come with me when I'm flying through a portal is always much preferable to dropping them. Implementation of puzzles during action scenes is also fantastic, being simple enough to understand at a glance while also requiring you to think on your feet. Puzzles are only the half of it though. The other half of what makes this game shine is the narrative. Maybe this is a bold statement, but I personally think that Portal 2 has the best writing I've ever heard in a video game. Every single line of dialogue in this game cracks me up.
Oh no, the turbines again. I have to go. Wait, this next test does require some explanation. Let me give you the fast version. There. If you have any questions, just remember what I said in slow motion.
Some emergency testing may require prolonged interaction with lethal military androids. Rest assured that all lethal military androids have been taught to read and provided with one copy of the Laws of Robotics to share.
Just hang in there for 5 more... What? Jerry, you can't fire me for that. Yes, Jerry. Or maybe your prejudiced worksite should have accommodated a nanobot of my size. Thanks for the hate crime, Jer. See you in court, mate.
And it's not just the writing, it's the stellar delivery by a wonderful cast of voice actors. GLaDOS is still hilarious as ever, with Ellen McLean really dialing up her sarcasm and condescension to 11. She's a bit different in this game, now no longer putting on the ruse that she's a simple automaton, and actively holds a grudge against you for killing her in the last game. As a result, she speaks in a much more smooth and natural way, kind of halfway between her robotic presentation at the beginning of Portal and her more seductive voice near the end.
Look at you, sailing through the air majestically, like an eagle, piloting a blimp.
Most of the time, she's openly mocking you for being overweight and adopted, and at times pulling some really cruel pranks on you. One aspect of her writing that I really enjoyed was the constant attempts at trying to guilt-trip you for your actions in the last game, conveniently leaving out the fact that she was the one who was trying to kill you in the first place, of course.
Did you know that people with guilty consciences are more easily startled by loud noises? I'm sorry, I don't know why that went off. Anyway, just an interesting science fact.
But GLaDOS is no longer the only character in Aperture Science. The first character you end up meeting is a personality core named Wheatley. And guys, this little sphere might actually be the funniest character in the entire Portal franchise. He's a talkative AI that constantly gives the impression that he has no idea what he's doing, but pretends he does and sort of just keeps failing upwards because of your help. Though, to his credit, he does help you out of a few sticky situations. He really puts the personality in personality core, not just from the energetic delivery from Stephen Merchant, but in the expressive animations. And every single thing that he says is comedy gold. His quotes are permanently tattooed into my mind.
And it's not out of the question that you might have a very minor case of serious brain damage. Let there be light. That's, God. He's quoting God. Okay, alright, so I've got an idea, but it is bloody dangerous. Here we go. Ah! Oh, for God's... They told me that if I ever turn this flashlight on, I would die. They told me that about everything.
I also really like the evolution of his character and his relationship with you. Halfway through the game, the two of you formulate a plan to take GLaDOS' defenses out of commission and replace her with him, putting Wheatley in control of the entire facility. It takes him about all of 5 seconds of having absolute power to go mad with it and betray you, putting GLaDOS into a potato battery and sending the two of you falling into the depths of Aperture Science. Because, duh, putting a moron who likes pretending he knows what he's doing into a position of power will lead to this exact outcome. This turn of events leads to some interesting story reveals about both him and GLaDOS, as the two of you fall into the depths of old Aperture and you have to climb your way back out. Along the way, you hear the voice of Aperture's late founder, Cape Johnson, whose hilarious incompetence and carelessness make it really obvious why Aperture kept falling behind Black Mesa, despite their genuine scientific innovations.
You're not part of the control group, by the way. You get the gel. Last poor son of a gun got blue paint. All joking aside, that did happen. Broke every bone in his legs. Tragic, but informative. Or so I'm told. Oh, in case you got covered in that repulsion gel, here's some advice the lab boys gave me. Do not get covered in the repulsion gel. We haven't entirely nailed down what element it is yet, but I'll tell you this, it's a lively one, and it does not like the human skeleton. Let us know if you feel a shortness of breath, a persistent dry cough, or your heart stopping, because that's not part of the test. That's asbestos.
The performance by J.K. Simmons is absolutely impeccable, and he says some of the game's most iconic lines. You also reunite with Potatoes, who accompanies you for the rest of the journey in an interesting role reversal, as the two of you are now forced to cooperate in order to defeat Wheatley and keep Aperture from exploding. This is where she winds up getting some actually pretty interesting character development, as the game explores her origins and she realizes who she really is. When you get back to modern Aperture, you start running through Wheatley's tests while trying to work out a plan to take back control. In all his wisdom, he had decided not to run the functions necessary to keep the facility from exploding. Because, duh, putting a moron who likes pretending he knows what he's doing into a position of power will lead to this exact outcome. Wheatley's shift to an antagonist feels like a natural step, as he continues behaving pretty much the exact same way, as he stumbles over trying to insult you in the same way GLaDOS did, and tries to prove he's intelligent to counter the assertion that he's a moron. Eventually he tries to kill you, and after a lengthy and very creative escape sequence, you confront him in a boss fight that inverts what you had to do in order to defeat GLaDOS in the last game. If you haven't played Portal 2 yet, I won't spoil how you ultimately defeat him, I'll just say that it's wildly creative and the best kind of finale this game could have. With GLaDOS restored to power, she comes to the realization that the best course of action is to just let you go free, though it's ambiguous as to what exactly motivated her. Her arc and Chell's are both complete, and she sends you off with a song. 2, in fact. The single-player campaign is fantastic, as I've been highlighting, but there's also an entire co-op campaign that runs for just about the same length. Set after the events of the single-player game, co-op has you and a friend controlling Atlas and Peabody, two robots who are completing the cooperative testing initiative, so that GLaDOS can track down some human test subjects that are in storage. Most of the puzzle elements are the same as in single-player, with the challenge being the need to frequently rely on your partner, and especially their portals, along the way. The design is still top-notch, of course, and it's a fun challenge to talk out a puzzle with your partner and figure out the solution. Atlas and Peabody are expressive characters that have a range of gestures you can use to express yourself to each other or to GLaDOS, much to her disapproval. And while the story is more an excuse plot than anything else, it's still worth it to hear more of GLaDOS' put-downs and sarcastic quips at your incompetence. Shockingly, it took me 12 years of replaying the single-player campaign before I eventually played the co-op to completion with a friend, and I'm really glad I got the chance to experience it. And if all of that wasn't enough, there's still even more content in this game. I'm, of course, talking about the 6th Sense Motion Pack DLC for Razor Hydra. Oh wait, that's Abandonware, because the Hydra was discontinued. Never mind, I meant the Perpetual Testing Initiative. This is basically just a Steam Workshop integrated level creator, but even that has its own story, and it's as nonsensically aperture as it can get. Cave Johnson has decided that it's too expensive to hire people to design new test chambers, so instead he comes up with a ploy to trick Aperture employees from other dimensions into doing it for him and then stealing them back. I guess this confirms that alternate dimensions also exist in the Half-Life universe. I mean, sure, why not at this point? They already have extra-dimensional aliens and government men in suits with briefcases. Whenever you boot up a user-created test chamber, you get a brief introduction from whatever version of Cave exists in this dimension, with some pretty amusing dialogue. Always good to hear more of J.K. Simmons' voice. The actual level creator is also pretty intuitive and easy to use and understand. I'm really glad that Portal 2 includes this, because it puts the power of level creation in the hands of the players. This ensures that we'll always have new Portal 2 content, if you're looking for more to play. Hell, even I've made my own level, which is mostly just kind of average. This tool, along with the myriad mods there are for the game along with its predecessor, are so crucial because I don't see a Portal 3 on the horizon anytime soon. It seems clear that Valve has done everything they wanted with the series for now, at least in terms of its core gameplay loop. And while I do of course wish that they had the chance to push the boundaries of the series a little further in a new title, I don't necessarily mourn the loss of Portal in the same way as I do Half-Life. Portal 2 was a satisfying conclusion to the stories of Chell and GLaDOS, and I'm happy that I was able to end the Portal series on an incredible high note. It's probably the best puzzle game of all time, and its influence was massive in the game industry, and on me. But there's still one more game set in this universe that I think is even better, and I think you know what it is. Number 1. Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 is unquestionably phenomenal. It does what all the best sequels do. It manages to take basically every good and great element of the original and crank it up to 11, while doing away with most of its shortcomings. It expands the universe in such an interesting way, tightens the gameplay so that every encounter is perfectly paced, gives us compelling characters and a unique setting full of endless imagination, and tells a fantastic story that really makes you feel like you've just gone through an absolutely epic journey to save the world. Just like Portal 2, Half-Life 2 is very special to me. While Portal 2 was my gateway into PC games in general, Half-Life 2 was my gateway into more mature games. I grew up mostly on Nintendo, and was never one of those kids who desperately wanted to play COD before I was old enough. I didn't know anything about the Half-Life series before buying this game in the orange box. I didn't even know it was a first-person shooter. But I was pulled in from the very second that I started this game all the way up to its climactic end. It showed me what a linear first-person shooter could be, a vehicle for dramatic, intense sequences and a way to deliver an engaging, immersive narrative through the eyes of the player character. In a way, Half-Life 2 was part of my coming of age, a revelation for an entire world of video games that I never knew existed until then. 20 years after the events of the first Half-Life, the G-Man has brought Gordon Freeman out of stasis into City 17, on an Earth dominated by the alien collective known as the Combine, who invaded through the dimensional rift caused by the Black Mesa incident and conquered humanity shortly after. After meeting some old friends and reacquiring his HEV suit and trusty crowbar, Gordon sets out on a journey that will take him across the city, and in the process, inspire an uprising against the invaders, while playing into the machinations of his ever-mysterious employer. Right off the bat, this game makes a great impression. City 17 is a frankly horrifying dystopia that evokes 1984-esque police states, except it's being ruled over by alien invaders. The oppressive vibes are everywhere, from the over-aggressive masked police to the depressed civilians wearing identical clothing to the omnipresent man on the giant television screen spouting propaganda. You learn so much about the Combine's regime just by looking around at the harsh utilitarian technology that's been crudely fused together with the crumbling 20th century Eastern European infrastructure. The looming presence of the Citadel, their command center, is a constant reminder of the state of the world no matter where you are. Despite that, the parts of the environment that the Combine simply chose to abandon are in arguably much worse shape. The canals are full of toxic poison, the coast is home to deadly antlions, and Ravenholm is an entire nightmare all on its own. Head crabs, barnacles, and zombies lurk around in dark corners, while Combine-created bioweapons like the Striders and gunships are deployed to keep the civilian populace in check. It truly feels like nowhere is safe, and that humanity is on the brink of extinction. And that's where you come in, to shake up the status quo. Upon arriving in City 17, you're intercepted by some old friends. First, you reunite with Barney Calhoun, the Black Mesa security guard who is the star of Blue Shift, and then meet Isaac Kleiner and Eli Vance, who are both based on two of the scientist archetypes seen in Half-Life, as well as Eli's daughter, Alyx. Meanwhile, the figurehead in charge of the Combine on Earth turns out to have been the much-discussed administrator of Black Mesa, Wallace Breen, who brokered a peace agreement with the Combine in exchange for power. I really like how Valve took generic NPCs and mentioned-only characters from the first game and fleshed them out into actual people in the sequel. Even though these characters are technically all new to this universe, the game succeeds at making it seem like they're people Gordon had history with at Black Mesa, and gives you everything you need to know about them. Hell, this was my first Half-Life game, and when I went back to the first game, I was shocked that half the things established by Half-Life 2 weren't in there. That's how good the natural storytelling is here. After regaining the iconic HEV suit, now in its Mark V form, a mishap with the teleporter and a pet head crab results in the Combine learning that Gordon is alive and mark him as Anti-Citizen 1, sending entire armies after him as he makes his way across the city, leaving a trail of death wherever he goes. This game feels so much better to play than the previous ones. Movement is a lot more controlled, with sprinting now being bound to its own key, meaning that the occasional platforming is no longer a total nightmare. All the guns feel satisfying to use and have excellent sound design, and interaction with objects is better than ever thanks to the advent of the Source Engine's new dynamic physics engine. Nearly every object is affected by the physics engine, and it improves the gameplay experience in so many ways. Not only does this allow for fantastic puzzle design, it also gives the player the opportunity to play with and use the game's physics as a weapon itself. About a quarter of the way through the game, Gordon obtains the Gravity Gun, a 2-trigger weapon that allows you to pull physics objects towards you from afar and launch them towards enemies at high velocity. It has a lot of practical use and is also a ridiculously fun way to dispatch foes. I'd argue that it's become nearly as iconic to this franchise as Gordon's crowbar, and it's probably my favorite video game weapon. Speaking of weapons, the roster you get this time around has been tightened up with some interesting additions. You get your crowbar first, of course, as well as your standard pistol, SMG, and grenades, all of which have been Combine branded. You later obtain a revolver, a shotgun, and a Combine pulse rifle, which has the secondary ability to shoot out orbs of energy that vaporize enemies. Rocket launchers are available for fights against big guys, and the crossbow can snipe little guys from afar. It's not quite as expansive a weapons list as in the Half-Life 1 titles, but I think that Valve trimmed the fat with their changes and only kept the essentials. Plus, the gravity gun carries a lot of interesting combat scenarios, making reliance on guns less of an issue throughout the game. To go along with interesting weapons are an assortment of enemies, which also follow the philosophy of trimming the fat and expanding what's already there. Head crabs, barnacles, and zombies all return from the first game, though there are also fast and poison variations of head crabs that create different kinds of zombies. The Combine soldiers and civil protection fulfill the same role as the military from the last game, except their AI is far smarter and better at working together. There are also the new antlions and antlion guards, and the Combine's bioweapons in the form of the massive Striders and gunships. It's quite a roster of rogues. Of course, interesting weapons and enemies can only carry a game so far. What makes a great experience is having top-notch level design to support it. And to no one's surprise, Half-Life 2 absolutely delivers in this department. It keeps up the tradition of introducing new set pieces for the player to constantly jump into, and unlike the first game, I don't think any of them overstay their welcome. Whether this be driving an airboat while being chased by a killer helicopter, chopping up zombies with sharp objects in a dark town, driving a buggy down the coast, commanding a squad of antlions to raid a prison, commanding squads of rebels to attack the Combine, or using a supercharged gravity gun to absolutely tear through the Combine's home base, there's never a dull moment in this game. And those are just the big examples. These concepts are introduced to the player in simple but effective ways and escalate accordingly along with the narrative progression, making you feel like you've just gone through a truly epic journey through hell and back, to an even greater extent than the first game even. I think Gordon's journey is actually pretty compelling. You start out as a man on the run from the evil regime that's decided you're a threat, and while the Resistance is clearly under-resourced and a bit in over their heads, your very existence is inspiring to them, and they'll do anything they can to help you along the way. When Gordon and Alyx escape the super prison Nova Prospect and destroy it in the process, they inadvertently spark an all-out war between the Resistance and the Combine, one in which the rebels rely upon Gordon's leadership to take down their oppressors. This leads to some truly awesome sequences that are super empowering for the player, but they also make me wonder even more about Gordon's mindset throughout all of this. I find it really interesting how the rebels basically worship him as their messiah, even though he's the one ultimately responsible for why the world is like this in the first place. Even though he defeated the Nihilith and survived impossible odds in the first game, this ultimately led to the Combine invasion through the rift created in Black Mesa, resulting in their full takeover of Earth. Does he feel guilt over leading the Resistance who worship him as a hero, or remorse for how his actions permanently changed the state of the world? I guess the one definitive positive result of his actions in Black Mesa was the freedom of the Vortigaunts, who helped both Gordon and the Greater Resistance in pretty big ways out of gratitude and a mutual hatred of the Combine, so maybe this was how things were meant to be. All of these questions are on my mind when entering the final stretch of the game, when Gordon finally storms the Citadel, the ultimate symbol of the Combine's oppression that's been visible for nearly the entire game, to face Dr. Breen and rescue Gordon's trapped allies. This is where the game strips you of all your weapons, vaporizing them but accidentally supercharging the gravity gun, allowing you to mow through Combine troops in a cathartic rampage while Breen taunts you from his giant screens that you can now rip from the walls, knowing that for all of his power, he won't be able to stop you. The final encounter isn't much of a boss fight, but is no less epic than it needs to be. Rather than face down an epic threat like in the Nihilith fight, you just have to prevent Breen from escaping via his dark energy teleporter while he throws the last of his resources at you, to no avail of course. The climb up is treacherous, and the way you ultimately deal with the forming portal is simple but effective, with good pacing, which puts it above the Nihilith fight in my opinion. The G-Man returns to congratulate you on your efforts before sealing you away again, at least until the Vortigaunt's interference in Episode 1. There's a lot more that I can talk about that I love about this game, like how excellent the facial animations are even by today's standards, or how unique and fucking cool the art direction of the Combine technology is, but chances are that if you're watching this video, you've played Half-Life 2 and already know how great it is. I don't need to be the one to tell you. Its impact not only on its own franchise, but on video games in general, is impossible to quantify, and it kicked off a new generation of mods built in the Source engine that continue to keep its legacy alive today, even while Valve themselves scarcely released official Half-Life games. And hey, maybe I'll talk about some of those mods soon. Keep an eye out for that. But how would you rank these games? Which ones are your favorites? Did you agree or disagree with where I put certain games? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.
In the meantime, this is where I get off.